Hey everyone. Today I am joined by my cousin Megan. I'm so used to calling you by, do you want me to say your former last name or do you want to be more private?
Let's be more private just
Okay.
because of what we're talking about today.
Deal, deal. Thank you for coming on here to talk about what we're about to talk about, you guys. It'll be very interesting. So, Megan and I are second cousins, and I'm really big when it comes to accurate definitions around how you're related to someone. And I find genealogy really fascinating. So, technically, we share a set of great grandparents. Our moms are first cousins, and we grew up on opposite sides of the country. So, Megan is over in the Southern California area. You're a few years younger than I am, but wise beyond your years. And we have kids who are about the same age. So you have a daughter who will be 4 later this year. Is that right?
Yeah, she'll be 4 in September.
That's right. That's right. Okay. Yeah. So my son and your daughter are almost exactly the same age.
Mhm.
And you, we were just talking about before this recording, you are truly a Renaissance woman because you are a doula, an IBCLC. Recently, now, you are officially a nurse practitioner and you're a
Mhm.
toddler mom.
Yes,
Did I
all
miss
of the
anything
above.
there?
No, no, that's all.
So, for today's episode, we thought it would be interesting to have a conversation primarily about because initially you came to me and you're like, hey, there's something big going on in the doula world around certifications and insurance and what this means for women who are now hiring doulas. So, we're going to start off with that. But I also want to chat with you about some breastfeeding trends that we're seeing going on, especially with your experience as an IBCLC. Let's kick it off with okay, so you are telling me that the whole doula world has shifted so that now women who used to be amazing doulas, it's no longer the case. Now pregnant women are just being assigned or they're finding these random individuals who happen to be certified as doulas. What do you mean by that? Can you tell me more?
Absolutely. So I think it's important to give a little bit of a backstory first. So when I first became a birth doula, postpartum doula, this was in 2017, and things were totally different. So the main organizations that people would use to become trained were DONA and Kappa. And for the most part, people just weren't becoming certified. It cost a lot of money. Like I'm talking probably $1,500, sometimes upwards of $2,000 just for a piece of paper. So a lot of our clients, they didn't care about the certification aspect of things. They felt like, well, it doesn't get us anywhere, so why would we need a certified postpartum doula? And that's kind of how the rest of us felt too. Of we don't want to limit our scope of practice by having to go through this other organization. So we just didn't become certified. We would do our trainings, we would get mentored in the community, and then we would just continue on our way. And then in about 2022, things started to shift. So, and I'm sure that these organizations existed prior to this. However, Carrot came online. And Carrot is a employee benefit company who really they market more towards the like large companies such as UCLA Health System or Netflix was another one that they market strongly to. And they're kind of subsidizing doula work, which on the surface is amazing. Everybody deserves a postpartum doula. I strongly believe that. However, the way they went about it wasn't so great. So they didn't want to just pay anybody. They didn't want to pay like somebody's mom or sister to come and support their clients. So they said, well, how can we regulate this industry? And then they started requiring that whoever works for them is certified. Now, on the surface, you're probably wondering, well, why would doulas care about working with this company? And the answer is that they paid a heck of a lot more.
How much more?
So in my area, we were probably making about $40 an hour at that time, and Carrot started to charge or pay their doulas 60, 65. I've even heard of doulas charging $75 an hour
And how are
just
they able
to
to
work.
do that?
So Carrot gives a package, and the people who are part of that package, they get a certain amount of money set aside for their doula services. And with that, doulas are able to charge whatever they want as long as it comes out to the total of that package.
So, okay, aside from the cost difference, the certification, what on the receiving end, as a postpartum mom who's hiring a doula, let's say, who's now certified through Carrot, how would that experience be different than just finding the non-certified, local village doula through word of mouth?
Absolutely. So what we started seeing is that nobody wanted to pay for the DONA and CAPA certifications. It was too much money. And so all of these overnight companies started popping up, and I'm talking literally like you take a few hours of a course and they will send you a certificate. I know. And other people were literally going on their laptops and creating a postpartum doula certificate so that they could send it in to Carrot and get paid more money. So it's literally people who have no experience at all are saying that they're certified postpartum doulas working through Carrot. So to compound this, there are other nighttime providers such as night nannies, newborn care specialists, and they wanted a piece of the pie. And so they went and did these overnight trainings or created their own certificate on their laptops, submit it to Carrot, and now they get to get paid. And they are not trained as a postpartum doula.
And now I can tell you are not happy about this, and I'll say my piece later, but I wanna hear tell me why this irks you, like, specifically.
Yeah, it bothers me because the scope of practice is vastly different. And when people want to hire a postpartum doula, they want the whole family care. They want mom, dad, siblings, grandparents, pets to be taken care of. They want the household taken care of. They expect a certain level of professionalism, especially when it comes to breastfeeding support. That's something that doulas do very frequently. And newborn care specialists and night nannies just aren't trained in this. They are amazing at taking care of the baby, but that's
Right.
kind of where things stop. And so it bothers me because I also own a postpartum doula matching service. And so when I get people who are using Carrot and they say like, well, I was going to hire this person, but they're actually a newborn care specialist. It bothers me because the standard of care is very different.
Have you tried reaching out to Carrot? I mean, obviously, this is, like, a huge corporation, but have you expressed your concerns with them? And I'm sure you were brushed off and, like, you were told to talk to some AI chatbot about your grievances.
Actually, yes. And this is something that the postpartum doula world has been trying to fight since 2022. That is
Hmm.
probably one of our biggest grievances is that nobody asked the postpartum doula community how to make this accessible for their clients. It's the answer is always go talk to your client. So they recently started to have a doula who is advocating for us, but that is recent and it's still a business for them, right? So it's not like things are going to change overnight.
Whereas you, as an individual and as a mom, as someone who has experienced breastfeeding yourself, keeping things small and local, you actually care about the whole family's well being. Um, and yeah, you have a business, but it's ethical. Um,
Right.
two can be true at the same time. But when it comes to Carrot, it's like, I mean, they literally just care about bottom line revenue. They saw this opportunity, they seized it, they wanted to capitalize on it. And so who's going to suffer is the families, not just the moms, but the
Exactly.
families.
Exactly. Yeah.
Are you hearing of horror stories like already of families who have said like they've felt the bait and switch happen? And then
Yeah.
what can you talk to some specifics like what are these families experiencing as a result of this corporate greed with Carrot?
Yes. So as that business owner as well who has sent out people who claim to be postpartum doulas, like I can do all the research I want, but it's really the parent experiences that matter the most. And I fully admit we have made mistakes. We have sent out people who were both newborn care specialists and postpartum doulas, didn't have the postpartum doula training. Um, as strongly, I should say. And the parents were complaining that there was no breastfeeding support, that they just wanted to bottle feed the baby at night and just head out on their shift. There was no like household care, there's no household management. So nothing that would like put a family in danger per se, but it's just the scope of practice is so vastly different.
Hmm. So, what do we do from here?
From here, it's difficult to say because now our postpartum doula industry is very money based.
Mhm.
And so I've tried to make a difference by creating our own postpartum doula training that comes with mentorship. But it's really important, I would say more so for the families to really interview the people that they're going to hire, ask about their experience, and specifically ask for references. Like call the people that they've worked with in the past. I think that Carrot has wonderful potential, but they are a business that doesn't consult with doulas, and so they don't know who to ask. They also have a registry of just random people who submit, hey, I'm a certified postpartum doula, and anybody can just go and pick off of that registry.
So, at a minimum, what should all postpartum doulas be doing for families, regardless of preferential differences?
Absolutely. So, at a minimum, I would say breastfeeding support is going to be key because if moms have breastfeeding support, they're more likely to continue breastfeeding.
Right.
Um, I would say household management is super important too. So making sure that things are tidy, that you're doing their laundry. Um, you don't necessarily have to like deep clean or anything like that, but dishes would be lovely if you see that it's stacking up. Cleaning bottles and pump parts as needed, and then making sure that mom is taken care of. So meal prepping for her, making sure that she's taking her naps and she's able to get a shower, things like that.
I would have to agree with you as someone who had a postpartum doula the first time around. How do women know whether they're being charged a fair rate?
You would want to call around. So call multiple doulas. Don't just take one person's answer. Um, if you're going through an agency, they most likely are going to try to charge more because they get a piece of the pie also.
Hmm.
So just making sure that you're not just accepting one answer and really working within your budget. One question that I always ask before I send somebody to somebody else's home is what is your budget? And then find somebody who is able to work within that.
Right. Sometimes women, I feel like they don't even know where to start with, like, what is my budget? Because they're like, well, I feel like it's going to be expensive regardless. And then if you give someone a range, of course, you're gonna want the lowest end, they're gonna want the highest end, right?
Absolutely.
So and I mean, I learned this when I was selling software sales, like, if you give a range, beware, like, they're gonna want the low end, you want the high end.
Right.
So are you better off not doing a range and instead saying, like, "This is my flat rate budget?"
I would say so.
Yeah,
I would say maybe give it within a dollar or two. But
yeah.
when I am interviewing families, I always ask them, like, are you okay with this dollar amount per hour? And then I find a doula who's okay with that. So then there's really no need for negotiation.
Mhm. Um Okay, now speaking of really good questions to ask doulas when you're interviewing them, are you okay just talking a high level about how you had a birth keeper in your first birth?
Absolutely.
Okay. So I find it interesting because you are a nurse practitioner and you chose well, the intent was to stay home. You had this wild 3-day long labor at home. Like the intent was to have a free birth. You did end up transferring to the hospital. You still had the vaginal birth. I know it was traumatic nonetheless. But interestingly, you hired a birth keeper or like a doula, birth
Mhm.
support. And in hindsight, I know you and I spoke about this, and there's going to be we had this document in the past, and I've made some revisions to it with your help. And so this is going to be a freebie that I'll be offering, and I will link it in the show notes, and it'll probably be on Instagram as well. But what were just a couple of the questions in hindsight you had wished you asked your birth attendant before hiring her?
Well, that's a great question, and obviously something I didn't think about until after. So I had asked a lot of questions about whether our personalities would blend together, what her training was. I asked for her references, but what I failed to ask was backup support. Nobody expects that their labor is going to last 75 hours.
Yeah.
And I don't think she was prepared for that either. So she did wind up leaving in the middle of my labor multiple times. And then when it was decided that it was time for me to transfer after like 50 hours or something like that, um, she didn't come with me to the hospital. She visited me for a few hours later on and then left again before the birth of my daughter. And yeah, I really wish that I had asked her, "Well, who is your backup? Can I talk to them?
Hmm.
What would you do if there's a transfer? What else do you have going on during my labor? Not just other moms, but like if you're taking a break, what are you doing? Where are you going?" Yeah, that's what
Yeah.
I was.
Did you and remind me, you spoke with her like sometime after the birth to
hmm
try to better understand what happened, make sense of the long labor, her involvement in supporting you, and what were some of the more noteworthy things she told you?
She said that she wouldn't have done anything differently.
Yeah.
So that was obviously hard to hear.
Yeah.
Um, she also wound up deciding not to continue in birth work. So she decided she was on a path to become a midwife. She was a student midwife at the time. It was not a licensing program, so she was planning on just being unlicensed, but she did stop that program fully. I guess she wasn't quite prepared for what my birth would lead to for her as well, and her feelings and emotions.
Is this a program that is online training only, or is it a mix of in-person and online training?
This is an online program,
Got it.
and the online program, then you have to find a mentor in your community to attend births with.
Okay. Okay, so yeah, I was often asked like what are questions that I should be asking in an interview, whether it's we have moms who are listeners who are looking for midwives who are licensed or unlicensed, just birth attendants or birth keepers, doulas, whatever you want to call it. Um, and I would say maybe a very small percentage who are actively seeking an OBGYN for whatever reason, but usually I think our listeners are looking for some type of a midwife. So, regardless of the type of specialist you're looking for, it's nice to have these questions up front instead of in hindsight. But of course, with every birth, like we're going to think of these things in hindsight, right? So, um, yeah. And now, is there anything else that you wanted to say about the whole doula debacle before we move on to breastfeeding stuff? Anything that you think the listeners must know about this
Yes.
situation? Yeah.
So I think that when we go through um, other companies, such as the Carrot program. I know Kaiser and Medi-Cal and all of these commercial insurances have started to cover doula services, which in theory is lovely. You're not getting a fully authentic doula a lot of times because we have to go through the proper channels to be able to get certified enough to work with those companies.
Yeah.
So, for example, Carrot limits the scope of practice of doulas. We are not allowed to do any kind of light housekeeping at all, which is a huge part of the doula role is household management. So,
Yes. That's one of the main reasons I wanted a postpartum doula is because I knew and I wanted my full-time job in early postpartum to be being glued to the sofa or the bed,
mhm.
just breastfeeding on demand. And if you're truly doing that and resting, you're not supposed to be doing laundry and dishes and mopping the floor. So I can't imagine not having that, at my disposal. This just reminds me so much of, well, actually, before I go on, why do you think it is they wanted to limit the scope of practice to exclude housekeeping?
I think they genuinely just did not ask postpartum doulas what they do. And they didn't want to have to pay for a housekeeper. They wanted to pay for somebody who could come in and I don't know what they were expecting that the doula does, just sit with the mom on the couch all day. um,
Yeah, which
yeah.
if mom wants that, like, if mom's paying the dual and mom wants that, sure, but usually you're gonna want some help around the house or yeah, like you said, holding the baby
Right.
so mom can take a shower.
Yes.
Fascinating. This
Yes.
bothers me. It just reminds me so much, like, not all the time, but a lot of the time, when providers are bought out, when private practitioners are bought out by group practices in the hospital, or, they're on all these insurance panels, like, their hands are tied with the ways that they're really able to give care, like, back in the day, we used to have, like, the community pediatrician who'd come by with a briefcase and stethoscope, right, and really spend an hour with each child. Now that's considered a luxury, not a right, and that is considered cash pay out of pocket, like, usually a concierge type of practice. And now it's just churn and burn, baby. Like, I got 5 to 10 minutes. You need antibiotics? Here you go. Shot, 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 antibiotics. Get out of my office. I have 4, I'm quadruple booked.
Yes, and what we're noticing is the same thing starting to happen in commercial insurances. So, like through Kaiser Medi-Cal, they will pay for 1 hour. You get 8 one-hour visits. And doulas come to me and they're like, I don't know what to do in an hour. Like, do I help the mom take a shower or am I supposed to like do just the dishes? It's wild.
This is so sad because so when I had my postpartum doula, she was there. I basically could set the schedule, but it's within our budget. So I think we had her Tuesdays and Thursdays at one point for 4 to 5 hours at a
Oh,
time. 1 hour. You're not that it's like, "Okay, you want me to unload and reload the dishwasher?"
right. Like, I can't
That's
even have time to
ridiculous.
ask the mom how she's doing, how she's feeling, because by the time I'm done with those questions, our time is over.
This is very depressing. So basically, all this is to say moms are not able to get the same quality of care through a corporation like Carrot. So once this like goes more public and moms are realizing that to me it just feels like a scam, they're getting gypped. These moms are being duped. Wouldn't they just bypass Carrot altogether and go directly to a doula instead?
So I would hope so. However, couple things is that Carrot helps to subsidize
Oh,
their
that's right. That's right.
payment.
Yeah.
But the other thing is that because Carrot offers to pay so much more per hour, it
Yeah.
has actually changed the rates of cash pay doulas. And so
This is
this has outpriced so many cash paying clients.
This is very sad. So, being in Florida on the opposite coast from you, I had no idea that this was going on, but I'm also a little bit out of the whole postpartum doula world since my kids are a little bit older. So, is this just a California thing or are we seeing this? Is this like spreading nationwide?
This is starting to spread nationwide. I would say that California was probably one of the first states to see this, mostly because we have a huge postpartum doula culture. And
Right.
so almost everybody who could afford it was hiring a postpartum doula. And also, the large companies like Netflix, UCLA Health System, that's who Carrot was marketing to. And
Super
those
sad.
are in California.
Yeah, this reminds me of like how the nanny trade has been commodified and
Hmm.
sometimes not always you will see nannies who are just in it for the paycheck. They are checked out and they're just checking boxes, they're disengaged. Whereas I would so much rather bypass that system and just find someone who loves kids, who maybe wants to do something in childcare one day, who maybe doesn't have all the experience on paper, but she can shadow me and I can teach her the things I like and like I can kind of casually train her and just do it that way. So it's really sad when we see these care positions being commodified and what it means for moms and babies.
Absolutely. And I feel like we lose a lot of the important aspects of care when we are commodifying things.
Oh, absolutely. Okay, so let's shift gears a little bit and speak about breastfeeding. When did you become an IBCLC and why did you want to become one? Because I remember you were one before you even became a mom.
Yes. So I did things kind of backwards in comparison to most of my colleagues. So I started off in nutrition research, and this was in 2017 also. And I hated just being by myself in a lab, but I loved the idea of nutrition. And
Yeah.
so I literally went on Google and was like, what can I do in nutrition that is not sitting in a lab? And IBCLC came up, and I was like, oh my gosh, I'm already a birth and postpartum doula. Why didn't I think of this? Um, so that's kind of how I got into it. And then I started my training 2018, got my IBCLC like January 1st, 2020, and I've been working as an IBCLC since then.
Nice. Okay, so for over 6 years. So when you
hmm
decided to become an IBCLC, you were in your early 20s, right? Like, very young.
Yeah, I was very young. I wasn't even
So
married
impressive.
yet.
That is so impressive to me, that you had that kind of foresight. And obviously, I think there's so many perks. Like, not only do you get the joy of helping women achieve their breastfeeding goals, but how awesome that you already have all this knowledge and all this insight. So, as an IBCLC, did you find that you also needed to reach out to other lactation specialists during your breastfeeding journey, or were you able to resolve your own situations with your own knowledge?
I will say that when you have a child, everything that you know goes completely out the window. So I
Yes.
had two lovely postpartum doulas. I had my friend who's a lactation consultant come over, and my daughter did have a lip and tongue tie.
Yeah.
And so I had that revised, and everything was good after that. But I had a lot of struggles, and I definitely needed a lot of help.
Let's talk about oral ties. So,
Yes.
most listeners know that there's buccal or cheek ties, lip ties, and tongue ties.
hmm
And there's a huge, I think there's a lot of infighting in the crunchy community about whether to have them revised or, lasered or not.
hmm
I
Yes.
can see, and I've heard all the angles of all sides of this. I can understand and I can be sympathetic towards moms who want to do either, really. But
hmm
I do think that there's a time and a place to have ties revised. And I think it requires discernment. So I don't think we should be dogmatic either way. From your IBCLC perspective, can you tell me when you think it is appropriate to have oral ties revised versus not?
Yes, and this is a very nuanced question. So I think that first off, if the ties are limiting function, that is going to be the key thing. So a lot of parents will come to me and they'll say, my baby has a tie, and they send me this picture, and yeah, it kind of looks like there's a tight frenulum, but then you go in and the tongue is moving it to all areas of the mouth. They're able to stick it out. The latch is perfect. Milk supply is fine. They're not in any pain. Do we do anything about it? That's the big question. And my answer is no, I
I agree.
wouldn't. I think that there are other things that we can do before just jumping to a release in those instances.
Yeah, real quick story on that. So both my kids are tied in different ways, completely different ways. Neither of them have been revised, and I'll tell you why. So with my firstborn, my son, well, there was no. I am very fortunate. I did not have breastfeeding pain. I did need to work with IBCLCs for both kids for different reasons, but there was latch concerns, and it was less about pain. Um, so I feel fortunate in that regard, but I will say this, my son has a tongue tie, and he did have a lip tie, which, was actually reversed as a result of a fall that he had.
Yep, that's
Which
so
was really
common.
cool, yeah. So, he was, of course, like, climbing on the dresser, and it was, like, safely hooked up to the wall, but he had a fall, and it was awesome because it's like, "Oh, cool, we got this, like, free revision," basically. He didn't need to have it lasered when he was, like, 16 months old.
Yeah.
Now his tongue is still tied, but he was withdrawing milk wonderfully. There was no pain in the latch. It hasn't affected how he eats or how he speaks. So, and he saw a pediatric airway dentist who's like, yeah, he has a tongue tie, but let's not do anything. Like, it's fine. It's not so tied that he is struggling with function. Now, my daughter, on the other hand, has no tongue tie, and those are very common. So, no tongue tie, but she's very lip tied to the point where it's so low, it's like to the very, very bottom almost of her teeth. All that, but the dentist was just like, "You're going to flip her lip up and just try to get in there to brush her teeth. Uh, You don't need to do anything right now." She has low cheek ties as well, but also like nursing fine, eating fine. So, whatever. Now, if I had breastfeeding goals and I was exclusively breastfeeding and there was extreme pain, latch problems, improper withdrawal of milk, I would certainly think to have those ties revised,
Absolutely.
and lasered.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, so not all ties need to be revised, but also we shouldn't just do nothing across the board either. And I have seen that in the crunchy community. Have you?
Absolutely, and it does bother me because you see a lot of people who are like, "I am having so much pain
Yeah.
and low weight gain, low supply. My baby has a tongue tie," and they're not doing anything about it, and
Yeah.
that's the flip side of things. Um, and so the reason why that kind of bothers me is because it has the potential to lower your milk supply later on. If your baby's already experiencing weight gain issues, that's absolutely a reason to go get things, at least evaluated.
Yeah, I think that some of the crunchy moms are concerned about even having ties revised because it's considered a surgery.
Mm. So, do you want me to talk about that?
Yes. Yes, I do.
Okay, so it is not really a surgery. I would say that it's a procedure at best. It takes about 3 seconds. I have witnessed dozens of these procedures. There's different ways to do this. There's a laser, there's a scissor, or a scalpel. So the laser method, there's not a whole lot of downside because it cauterizes the tissue and evaporates at the same time, depending on which laser you're using, whether it's a cold laser or a hot laser. And you have to keep that laser in the same spot for at least 3 seconds before it will do anything. So there's not a real risk of damaging tissue surrounding that actual frenulum. And it allows them to do a little bit, stop, pause, reevaluate, do a little bit more, and get a really good release. And there's no bleeding.
Yeah, this is not like a circumcision,
No, this is
right?
not like a circumcision.
And can I share something that you and I talked about with that?
Yeah, go for it.
So, yeah, Megan, I mentioned, is on my mom's side. And so we share our Ashkenazi Jewish lineage. And after we posted the circumcision episodes, I was really pleased to hear from Megan that she also would not be interested in participating in that if she had a boy. And that was the first time I found that out about you because I'm never really sure with Jewish friends or family members like how they'll feel. And I had more and more very discreetly come to me and say, like, yeah, I agree with you, which is really cool.
Absolutely. I actually had no idea that that was even an option for Jewish people until I worked with a client probably like 6 years ago, and she was telling me that she's Jewish. And I was like, okay, I have to ask you a question. Your baby's not circumcised. What was the decision there? And she just kind of felt like it was unnecessary pain to put my baby through, and we can still be Jewish without having a
Yes.
circumcision. It is a culture, it is not just a religion. And so
Yes.
that I 100% agree with you. And tongue tie release is not like circumcision.
Yes. Oh, I am just, yeah, I feel like as time goes on, because we had such a big, you were born in the late 90s, right?
Mid 90s.
Mid 90s. Because when we were growing up, like when, you're so much younger, the age gap feels much bigger. But then
Yes.
as you get older, it feels like we're basically the same age.
Mhm.
But I love every time we have these conversations, I'm learning more and more about you and like, oh, okay, we see eye to eye on this and this. And it's really fun to discover all the ways that we see eye to eye on. And obviously if we don't see eye to eye, it's fine too. We're still a family, We
Mhm.
we can talk about it. It's all good. Okay, so the biggest mistakes I see with the whole tongue tie or
Mhm.
oral tie conversation is moms who will just find the provider who has the technical skills,
Yes.
but that provider never informed them you must do the pre-op and post-op myofunctional, oral
Mhm.
facial myofunctional exercises, right?
Absolutely. So, my biggest pet peeve and the saddest thing that happens is when parents come to me after the release and they're like, things did not get better. Like, well, yeah, you didn't do the prep work. So, what I mean by that is chiropractic work or body work in general is so important because your baby has limited mobility and limited function before a release. Now, chiropractic
Yes.
work or body work can help to relax all of the fascia. They might even be able to move their tongue a little bit more before the release. The release provider will get a better release if they're not having to fight against such tight tissue.
Yeah.
And the body work afterwards is super important too, because everything just tightens up again, and the healing process is sped up and continued when you're not having to fight against a super tight tongue. Um,
Yeah.
the other aspect is the oral therapy. And so making sure that you're doing oral exercises prior to a release, but also after, because again, they are suddenly going to have mobility, but they have no idea what to do with that tongue. It's just going to be literally flopping all over the place.
It's so
And
true.
so we need to teach them what to do with it. And that's where I come in. I'm going to do a little sidebar here that um, you have to be careful with the lactation consultant that you hire as well, because not everybody has the training to walk you through a tongue tie release.
Okay, so question for you on that. How can moms ask the right questions to an LC to determine whether that LC is qualified to have the training to guide them through the release?
Yes, I would ask what specific classes they took to really learn about tongue ties, because it is not something that we are taught in our training. So there are a lot out there that are amazing. I personally did the IBCLC masterclass with Jennifer Tao, and
Mm.
beyond amazing. I highly recommend it. That is what I've recommended because I think I was one of the first lactation consultants in my area in the last several years. And I have mentored many of them to then go get the IBCLC Masterclass certification. So that is, I would say, my top recommendation.
Okay, so I have a few follow-up questions. I was also told that there's only a few different specialists who can actually diagnose oral ties, including a pediatric dentist, some
Mhm.
pediatric dentists, and is it also IBCLCs or no?
No. So
Yeah,
unless you are a provider, so I'm a nurse practitioner, I am able to diagnose a tongue tie. But other providers, we can only suggest. We can say, this is what I
true.
see, and I think you should go get evaluated by someone else.
True. So, like, let's say you just have a doula. Now, you happen to be a doula who's also an NP, IBCLC,
Right.
but let's say you just have a doula who
hmm
doesn't have any like medical certification, who's like, yeah, that's a tie. Remember, that is a guess. That is not a diagnosis. So please get second and third opinions from people who can give a proper diagnosis. Um, so, what was the other thing? Now, we often hear about tongue ties, but there's also buccal or cheek ties, and there's lip
Yes.
ties.
Yes.
So, can you talk about like how do you know if there's no tongue tie, but there's just a lip or cheek tie, whether it makes sense to have the ties revised in order to improve breastfeeding, or do you just leave them alone?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I have two answers, one from the IBCLC perspective, one from the pediatric dentist perspective. So that was a question that I had asked the pediatric dentist I work with, because she is very careful with who she releases. She will send you home if she doesn't think that it's necessary. And she has sent my clients home when they only have a lip tie or just the buccal ties. And if it's not affecting function, a lot of times we just leave it alone.
Yeah.
Most of the time, kids are going to fall and they're going to break that tight frenulum. And as that happened to you, it happened to my nephew like a couple months ago, right in my backyard.
Yeah.
And so
Save the
I'm
money.
save the money, save the money.
Seriously.
Now, if it's affecting the latch, so if baby's lip is curled under completely and they're
Mm.
not able to get a seal at the breast and you're seeing leaking milk, you're hearing like smacking noises, which is different from clicking,
Can
then
you
I would
imitate
consider it.
each? Can you do a smack
Yes,
and then do a
yes,
click?
yes.
All right, listen
Okay,
up, everyone. This is a
so
smack.
a smack,
That's good or bad if you hear that.
we do not want to hear that.
Okay. Now what's a click?
A click is, tell me if you can hear this.
Okay. Yes, and my kids have done that. Wait, do some more. Yep.
That's called snapback. So that's when the
Snap back.
tongue is trying to lift up and then it snaps back to the floor of the mouth. Now, it doesn't mean that your baby has a tongue tie, though. So it
Mm,
could mean that your milk flow is just really fast and they're having a hard time keeping up with it. So
mhm.
that's why getting evaluated is so important.
Okay, now moving on to another topic, but related to breastfeeding. When I did my episode about why we're moving to Sweden, and I talked about like if there's a baby three in the future.
Mhm.
Now, as I was in the shower this morning, I'm like, can we handle a third? I don't even know. It's been like only a month since that episode. I'm like, I don't know about this. Can I do this at almost 40? But let's just say that happens in Sweden. And then the norm is after my 8 to 9 month maternity leave, like dad will be taking over full time with bottles,
Mhm.
most likely of
Yes.
pumped milk.
Mhm.
You told me something I had never heard of before, nor considered, and I never see this on social media. So right now it seems like the norm, at least in the city centers of Sweden, is when mom goes back to work full time at around 8 or 9 months postpartum and dad takes over, there's usually formula given in a
Mm.
bottle. Maybe some moms have pumped milk, not the moms I know of. I don't want to use formula.
Yeah.
So you said you don't have to worry about any of that because you can do something called reverse cycling, right?
Correct.
Where
Yeah.
I don't nurse at all during the day, but even if the baby is 8 to 9 months old, but then at night nursing, can you explain exactly how this works and why this is able to work without lowering supply?
Yes. So essentially, during a normal breastfeeding relationship, we expect the baby to eat. I mean, could be every hour, could be every 2 to 3 hours, depending on your baby, but during the day. And then at night, we'll usually see some longer stretches of sleep in most kids. Of course, there's going to be exceptions. But we'll usually see eventually like a 5 to 6 hour gap between feeds at night, sometimes a little longer. Now, with reverse cycling, we're just simply flipping it. So we're doing the longer stretch of not breastfeeding during the day, and then as soon as you're back from work, you're just going to be nursing every couple hours, even through the night. And for a lot of people, that is not sustainable. But for a co sleeping, breastfeeding mom, we're doing it anyways.
Totally. Even, I mean, my daughter, I just night weaned her, but just before she was a year and a half old, I mean, she's latching not just 2 or 3 times in the middle of the night, dozens, and
Yeah.
the only way that's feasible is because of the co-sleeping, really.
Exactly. So as long as you're giving your baby the breast frequently, like I'm talking as much as they want during
Yeah.
the middle of the night, reverse cycling is great. I actually worked with a nanny family who that's what they did. She did not
Wow.
like to pump during her workday. Now, granted, her workday was only 6 to 8 hours, so you kind of have to play it by
Only.
ear a
That's
little bit.
still a long time.
Yeah, it is a long time, but she was only away for that long. So she
Okay.
would feed the baby right before she left, like literally as she was walking out the door, she's feeding baby. And then as soon as she gets home, she starts feeding the baby again. And she would just nurse constantly for the whole afternoon, the whole middle of the night. And it worked for them. And because we're simply just flipping the 6 hour stretch ish, it worked well. Um, Go ahead.
Fascinating. So a few things come to mind because I had never heard of this,
Mhm.
and I mean, I've done a lot of breastfeeding research and talked to LCs. I'm wondering if this is just maybe discouraged in the Western world because, in order for it to be successful, it does involve bed sharing. And we know that that is
Yes.
not a part of the mainstream conversation because of
Yeah,
what the AAP says.
yeah.
Or moms are like, yeah, I get it, bed sharing safe, but we're not going to do that because what we often hear is like when your baby's 6 months old, like move them to like their own room or something or their own
I
crib. I don't
know.
know. And so you have moms who are like, I don't want to sleep with my 8 or 9 month old when
Mhm.
really that could be the difference between you keeping up your supply and not using formula
Right,
or using formula, right?
right, right.
That sounds like a worthwhile sacrifice to make, in my opinion.
In my opinion as well, and also people get caught up in, "Well, now I'm gonna have to give my baby a bottle," which, yeah, you absolutely can, and it makes it a lot easier. I personally chose to do bottle when I was away, but I was also gone for 12 hours at a time.
Wow.
So with shorter periods of time, you can also do an open cup. You can
That's right.
do a straw. They don't have
Yes.
to just do a bottle. And also, if you're leaving at 8 months, they're probably going to be eating some kind of solid food. And so they will likely be getting enough while you're gone.
Yes, it's so true. And I feel like moms tend to run a little bit more anxious with how much is my baby getting. We tend to hyper focus on growth charts and growth curves. And I'm petite. My husband is on the smaller size, so it's no wonder we have kids on the smaller size.
Hmm.
And someone once said to me, it's like somebody has to make up the 1%
Yes,
on the growth
exactly.
chart. it wouldn't make sense. How is it that everyone should be in the 99th percentile, right?
Mhm.
It's like my kids are not on the first percentile, don't worry, but like, yeah, they're not in the 99th percentile. That would be
Right.
so weird if they were, and like we're all small on our family. So
Exactly.
they're
Yes.
eating well, they look good, they're energized. I'm not worried about that. But we tend to in our culture, we think something's wrong if our kids
Mhm.
aren't giants. I've
Yes.
noticed.
Yes, and that, in my perspective, comes from formula culture because formula has been shown that babies are just going to be larger, but they're also being measured on the same growth curve, at least in the US, as breastfed babies. And so we should be
Yeah.
using the AAP growth curve or something like it, CDC, for kids who are formula fed, and then the World Health Organization one for babies who are breastfed, but we're not.
What do you think is the biggest difference specifically between the WHO and the CDC growth
That's a good
curves?
question. So CDC is based on US culture, which again is a formula feeding culture, versus World
Yeah.
Health Organization is worldwide. And so we're taking in, yeah, we have formula feeding culture, but it's also being offset by large amounts of breastfeeding in other cultures.
Yeah. So true. Okay, so remind me how long, because it was a long time, how long did you breastfeed your daughter for?
That's a great question because I am still breastfeeding.
Incredible. And so she
Yeah.
and she is 3.5, let's call it
Yes.
3.5.
Yes.
Yeah,
She's
like
just
you
about
said,
three
she'll
and
be
a
4
half.
in September.
Mm-hmm.
And you mentioned you were working 12-hour shifts, so did you
Mm-hmm.
have to return to work at 12 weeks postpartum?
No, no, but I
That's great.
made I made a huge sacrifice with my husband. He took over everything for the first year. And
That's
so I was
work-wise.
able work-wise. And
It's
so I
amazing.
was able to stay home. And then I started going back when she was about, I would say a year, a little over a year was when I started leaving for, and this wasn't every day. This was like 2 times a week that I was leaving for 12 hours. Um,
Okay.
but yeah.
So, talk to us about how are you able to manage work and also your initial breastfeeding challenges that you mentioned
Mhm.
you had very early on, shortly after her birth. How did you juggle all of that and manage to, you're still breastfeeding her at 3.5 years old? How did you overcome any struggles you had or like with being a modern woman in the workforce?
Yeah, I was determined. I never bought formula. That's another one of my pet peeves is when people say, well, I'm just going to have a can of formula in the house as a just in case. I'm like, if it's there, you're going to use it.
Right. I'm just going
So,
to get an epidural up in here just in case.
you're right.
Good luck saying no.
Let's just call the
Like,
anesthesiologist in here. So I recommend to my clients just don't bother. The
yeah.
amount of times that I have seen somebody not have a full milk supply is very rare, as long as we're, emptying your breast frequently. So just keeping that in mind that yes, it's going to be hard, but it's going to work is usually my motto. And it's really how hard you're willing to work. The other thing is that as long as you're emptying your breast even once a day, you're still going to make milk. And
Yep.
so I'm not like nursing my toddler on demand. It's when she
No.
wakes up for a couple minutes and for like 10 seconds before bed.
Right.
But I still have milk because she's still emptying my breast like once or twice a day.
Right. Now, for new moms out there who are expecting, this is your first rodeo with breastfeeding, you do need to be nursing, like I would say 10 to 14 times throughout a 24-hour
Easily.
cycle, like
Hmm.
in those early weeks to maintain your supply. When you get to Megan's point and you have a
Yes.
3.5-year-old, you certainly are not going to be nursing 14 times a day, right? Like once
Correct.
a day will do it. Okay,
Yes.
so that's really interesting. When do you plan on weaning? Is that something you've thought about or?
Yes, I've been thinking about it more lately, actually, after the last episode that you had, because
Oh,
I I always wanted my daughter to be able to wean herself, and I have been talking to my friends who are also still nursing their toddlers, and we're all kind of under the same feeling of this is never going to end if we don't make it stop. And I don't know how I feel about nursing a 4-year-old, to be entirely honest.
right.
We also recently started trying to conceive again, and I just don't
Yes.
know how I feel about it. So I have been saying no a little bit more frequently. She's okay with it. And
That's
that to me is a
awesome.
great sign.
You're so lucky because it can easily go the other way around where
Yes.
they like throw a fit. So That's okay, that's great, and, Megan's referencing the episode with Elena Bridgers. If you haven't
Mhm.
checked that one out, that's the one that came out, um, yeah, February 24th. So, yeah, I also was under the impression before the Elena episode that weaning was just something, like, if you wanna be uber holistic, that, like, you wait for your child to do, but then I thought of other things, like, okay, but potty training readiness, like, what if they
Right.
never say they're ready? Like, what
Exactly.
if they're 6 and they never said they were interested and, like, we've been waiting 6 years? So
We're
I was
just
like,
gonna keep
"Okay."
them in diapers? Yeah.
Right. But it's like, okay, how do you strike that happy medium? What is the
Mhm.
happy medium between, like, yeah, that you need this, you know this is good for them, and, like, okay, you know what? Like, we're at a point where they don't need this, and there are
Right.
so many other ways that we can nurture and we can comfort them. So I'm glad that that gave you some consolation. It's so cool that you have other moms in your area, especially in Southern California, who are nursing toddlers, I have to say.
Yes, and I don't know if it's that I just kind of cultivated those friendships early on, but a lot of them are doulas and or were doulas before having children. And I don't know anybody who stopped nursing early. Um,
Yeah.
Even outside of my doula community, my friends still nursed until at least a year. I don't know if it's because they're friends with me and so they got really great support and all of that.
Yes.
Maybe that's part of it. But yeah, I have friends who their kids are also 3 and they're nursing.
That's incredible. Once you start, you can't stop, literally.
I know.
But you know what? It's obviously better to be nursing for too long than
Right.
not long enough. We know that.
Absolutely.
So, okay, I want to still talk about some breastfeeding stuff because I just find this so interesting. Once every few months, we'll do a breastfeeding themed episode. And I just love that you are a mom, you're actively nursing, you've overcome these challenges, you have this IBCLC background too. Um, in the past, I've talked about low supply. There's perceived low milk
Mhm.
supply, which we see all over thanks to social media, instilling seeds of doubt and uncertainty into new moms. But then there's real low milk supply. What are some, I don't know, what are some of the less common reasons you're seeing for actual low milk supply?
So, I think that what's not talked about often is birth trauma can lead to low milk supply, and that is something that is not well known because and I'm talking like you not just you had a C-section, but like you hemorrhaged during your birth,
Yeah.
and that can lead to low milk supply. What's also not talked about is how to bring it back up just through nursing and pumping, but it might take like 4 to 6 weeks. I have seen it taken like, 4 to 6 weeks for moms to be able to get milk again. So it goes back to how hard are you willing to work for it. Other things, insufficient glandular tissue. So if you do not have enough glandular tissue, you're likely not going to have a full milk supply. And there's things you can do for that.
Like
But
what?
ag Go through is really helpful, moringa is really helpful. You could take this is, controversial, but I guess that's why we're here,
Hopefully not a vaccine.
domperidone. No,
Okay.
no, no, domperidone has a side effect of lactation.
Oh,
Um,
yeah. You mean the trans drug?
is that what it's known for? I only know it in the lactation sense.
Okay, so domperidone, this is the a hormone, right?
It's actually an antibiotic.
Okay, what am I thinking of?
Are you thinking about, like, Reglan maybe?
Inducing lactation. Okay, wait, let me see. I'm Googling right now. No, this is what I was thinking. It's
Oh, really?
domperidone, often
Uh-huh.
10 to 20 milligrams, 3 to 4 times daily, can be used alongside estradiol, progesterone, and frequent breast pumping to successfully induce lactation in transgender women, aka
Oh,
men.
I thought you meant, like, hormones to become trans.
Okay, okay. Okay, so the
Yes.
reason why that got a bad rap in my mind was because the first time I had heard of this being used was because men who were wanting to
Ah,
induce lactation to feel more like moms.
got it. Okay, that's
Yeah.
a whole other thing.
Yes, but it's the
Um,
same drug. So you're
Same
saying
drug,
there's
same drug.
actual so okay, so for women who are not into the trans agenda, this
Yes.
hormone is okay to use seriously if they have IGT.
Yes. Yes. So domperidone, okay, so it's illegal in the United States. And I, as a
Okay.
nurse practitioner, am not allowed to prescribe it. But if you go to Canada or you go to Mexico, I've even had people ship it from India, Europe. It is really helpful to increase your milk supply. And I have counseled moms through that process of titrating up the domperidone, and it is very successful.
Whoa, okay, more successful than, like, moringa?
Yes.
And what was the one you mentioned before moringa?
Goat's rue.
Goat's rue, like RUE?
Correct.
What is that?
That is an herb and it helps with developing mammary gland tissue. And so
Okay.
that's usually the first thing that I recommend in addition to the moringa to help increase first the prolactin and then the actual glandular tissue.
Okay, so we talked about birth trauma, specifically hemorrhage, IGT. What are some lesser known reasons women might have actual low milk supply?
Thyroid issues,
Yes.
PCOS is really common. If you had to go through IVF, I see a lot of
Yeah,
IVF moms that struggle with low milk supply, mostly because their hormones are not quite where they need to be. And so, thankfully, what I can do as a nurse practitioner is test hormones and then be able to recommend specific supplements or medication if needed for low milk supply.
and then you have moms who are concerned that the medication itself is going to go through breast milk. So, for
Yes.
holistic moms who
Mhm.
don't want their babies receiving any medications in their breast milk, what do you have to say about that?
I would say that supplements act as medications as well. They are
Mhm.
processed in very similar ways in the body. So if you're not wanting to take a medication, yes, we can do supplements. They're also a lot of times you don't know where they're coming from. Not that we necessarily know where pharmaceuticals are coming from, but
Sure.
it's kind of the same idea. But there are also barriers for medications to get into your milk supply. We don't see a lot of medications or supplements being able to cross that barrier into your breast milk. A lot of the time, it is just in your bloodstream, and there's filters that are in your really it's your breast tissue. And if it's a large molecule, it does not go through. If it's a smaller molecule, it can have the potential to go through, but usually in like 1% of the maternal dose. So I do think, and this is again just my opinion, but I do think that giving breast milk, even if you had to take medication for it, is better than giving formula. So
100%. I'll
that's
always agree
where
with
I
that,
land.
yeah. That's
Hmm.
where I land too. And this is as someone who doesn't love medications unless it's, like, absolutely necessary.
Hmm.
What about vaccines and breast milk?
So that is a little bit tougher because it does mount an immune response. And so the immune response of the mom is going to trigger an immune response in the baby as well. Um, Now, I am not entirely familiar with like every ingredient that is in like aluminum and things like that. I'm sure it can go through to your breast milk. So, my recommendation is typically to wait until you're not breastfeeding. I personally have not really done any vaccines while breastfeeding,
Yeah,
just because I I just don't love that my immune response is going to become hers.
right. Okay. Um, what is the most annoying breastfeeding advice you see women giving other women, especially online or
The
in your
one that
community?
The one that comes to mind is that stopping breastfeeding is going to help your mental health.
Mhm.
So that one has been bothering me a lot recently, especially with all of the like Bobby formula campaigns. That's been on my mind a lot. There are biological reasons why we continue to breastfeed and feel like happy about breastfeeding because every time you're having a letdown, you're having an oxytocin rush. And if you just simply stop nursing, that oxytocin rush is gone.
Yeah.
And that in itself can lead to postpartum depression. So,
But
yeah,
there are moms who I've seen, they are insistent in saying that it does improve their mental health when they stopped. So, aside from the physiological benefit of the oxytocin rush that happens when you're breastfeeding, to me, it just seems like it's this perception of, well, if I'm not breastfeeding, then someone else is offering a bottle so I
right.
can nap. Is that where the improved mental health is, or is it a support
Yes.
issue? What is it?
I believe it's a support issue. I have not had any of my postpartum doula clients need to or want to really supplement with bottles and formulas simply because I'm there to take care of everything else for them. And so they're able to just sit and do, cuddle their baby and breastfeed, where a mom who has no support, she has to do all these things and she can't really just sit there and breastfeed. Somebody else
Right.
needs to feed the baby.
Mm, that's so interesting. Um, Okay. And then what about triple feeding? What is it and when do you find that it's absolutely necessary?
So triple feeding is like my last resort. Um, I think that it puts a huge strain on the family, and in a lot of cases, it might be necessary to help bring weight gain up. So, what is it? Triple feeding is when you are breastfeeding and then pumping and then bottle feeding, and it is this cycle that goes on for, days on end. The goal is to increase your milk supply. Um, and if baby's weight gain is not doing great, then it also has the benefit of increasing their weight gain. It is such a strain on the family. The only time that I would recommend that is if mom's milk supply is truly, like, severely low, and I mean, like, she's making maybe half an ounce every few hours and baby is needing, 3 to 4 ounces, and if baby's weight gain is low.
Okay. Now, as a recent nurse practitioner, and I know that you recently trailed a pediatrician who seems
Mhm.
like a cool guy, um, typically I would say pediatricians have received a bad rap for not understanding how breastfeeding works and being quick to prescribe formula to moms. Are you seeing a change? Are you seeing like a more positive trend where pediatricians are not quick to prescribe formula or just say fed is best and they're actually more aware of how breastfeeding works and the importance of it, at least where you live?
I can't speak to elsewhere, but where I live, yes. I would say 5 years ago, I did not see pediatricians being very supportive of breastfeeding. In fact, I would walk into their office and they'd have formula out for parents to take.
Wow.
The last 2 or so years, I have started to see pediatricians really following the WHO code, not having formula out, and also just being a little bit more knowledgeable in breastfeeding, how much work it takes, sometimes even having lactation consultants available for them to see. And I would say just not as pushy about formula. I had several pediatricians come in to just say hi to me when I was giving birth, and they were like, "Make sure you breastfeed until 2 years." So it's
Wow,
getting
until 2
better.
years, they're saying that. That's
Yeah.
incredible. I
Yeah,
figured they
and
would say, like, "Try to make it to 6 months."
no, they said 2 years, and then my colleague who is a pediatric nurse practitioner, his wife is still breastfeeding his 3-year-old.
Absolutely incredible. I'm so
Yeah.
happy to see this,
Yeah.
especially in a place like California where I just assume, like, it's all about not all about, but, there's a huge Hollywood culture and it's about,
Mhm.
like, looks and appearances and, aesthetics, and we don't need to breastfeed, but it's really nice. But, of course, you also have hippies and, just women who care about doing what's most biologically natural and normal.
Yes, in my area, I do see that the higher your net worth, the less likely it is for you to breastfeed long term. And I'm still trying to decide why. I think part of it is that they have children later in life. And so they want to
Yeah.
get back to whatever it is that they were doing before. And they do wind up having like 24/7 newborn care specialists. And so that's, I think, where the lack of breastfeeding comes from.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. That's really interesting. Um, so this might not be coming to mind immediately, but tell me some other breastfeeding things that aren't really spoken about. Like we talked about reverse cycling, like that are not really spoken about, and you wish that there was more conversation around. What are you seeing? What trends, patterns in your work?
I see a huge concern about introducing the bottle, and we have people
Yeah,
very polarized about that. About, like, oh, I need to be introducing the bottle because I'm going back to work, versus, like, I'm never going to introduce a bottle because I'm terrified that they're not going to come back to the breast.
yeah.
Um, I am pretty neutral about this because, in my experience, when babies prefer the bottle over the breast, it's because the flow of the bottle is too fast.
Mm,
So if we are slowing down the flow of the bottle to match the flow of the breast, I never see problems going back and forth between the two. So there's that aspect. Um, and also, babies are really smart. They know that one is the bottle, one is the breast. The analogy I like to make is fast food. If I were to grab fast food and eat it in my car, I'm just going to eat it without thinking about it. I don't have to work for it. That's like the bottle.
yeah,
Versus if I'm breastfeeding, I actually have to do work. And so I'm going to be less inclined to do the work.
right.
So babies ultimately will prefer the bottle if it's a fast flow. But if it's nice and slow, I don't see that big of a difference.
Yeah. I tried to introduce a bottle 3 different times to Julie, and I didn't have to because I wasn't going back to work,
Mhm.
but there were times when he was older and I was like, "Okay," like, I would feel better if he had a bottle of pumped milk so I can
Mhm.
go away for a few hours. It ended up being that I actually didn't even really need that because I was never away for that long, and he
Right.
could drink from an open cup anyway, which I know you mentioned before, but because I introduced it the first time when he was 12 weeks old, he didn't even get how to use it. I
Yeah.
introduced it again at 8 months old. That was the next time. He really didn't understand it.
Yes.
So, at that point, it's just like, what's the point? They're not getting
Yeah,
it.
there isn't a point. I would say that, I mean, they're not gonna get it. Um,
No.
I would say that if you're planning on introducing a bottle, the way that I recommend doing it is between 4 and 6 weeks. Like, get your established breastfeeding going, and then between 4 and 6 weeks, offer, like, half an ounce in the bottle, and do that maybe once or twice a week, and then just breastfeed your baby right after. So they're not having to take a full bottle, but at least they'll remember how to do it, and that's what I ultimately wound up doing.
Mm,
Again, I didn't, like, have to be away from her until 12 months, but I still wanted her to take a bottle, so it was literally, like, 2 sips in a bottle once a week that my husband would do right before breastfeeding.
wow. What's your favorite pump to use?
My favorite pump is probably the Spectra. They have been consistently good. Medela, I would
Mhm.
say, kinda went down the drain the last couple of years.
Mm,
There are some really good wearable pumps, but they should not be your primary because they're not strong enough to empty your breast fully and consistently. Hand pumps, honestly, are always a go-to for me if it is
yeah.
occasional, and honestly, I switched to a hand pump after a year because I just didn't wanna lug that giant pump around.
Totally. Hand pumps are great. How do you feel about pacifiers?
I am also neutral on pacifiers.
Okay,
So,
let's hear why.
my reasoning is that we're using it as a tool, and that's how I teach my clients. We are not like passy babies that they always have something in their mouth. But if your baby's in the back seat screaming, please give them a
Yeah.
pacifier. It's okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
The other time that I like doing a pacifier is a lot of my clients get really worked up when they are trying to change the baby's diaper and it's
Mm,
about to be feeding time and baby is screaming and parent is so stressed out. Like, just offer the pacifier. It's 2 minutes. It's gonna be
yeah.
okay. Regulate your nervous system a little bit and then latch your baby on.
Yeah, okay. So, admittedly, I do have, like, a slight aversion to a pacifier. I don't know if it's because 'cause I'm programmed that way or whatever. I was a passy baby. I am
Mhm.
shocked I don't have more orofacial issues and, like, I never needed braces. I don't
Yeah.
know. It's, like, because of a miracle. I always needed one in my mouth, in my hand, and
Mhm.
attached to my shirt.
Oh, you had 3.
Yeah, and, it's also amazing that, I was an early talker, whatever. I
Mhm.
don't even know how that was possible because I always needed 3 on me at all times, I
Yeah.
think maybe for years, like, maybe till I was 2, 3,
Mhm.
I don't even know. And so, I don't know if it's because of that, like, seeing that I have, like, the aversion, but I also was scared that there would be, oral facial issues or dental
Mhm.
issues
Mhm.
or speech issues, just hear about these things, and, of course,
Yeah.
there's nuance. Then when my daughter came around and she hated the car for several months and at times still hates it, it's
Yeah.
funny, I got desperate, I was like, "We're gonna try a pacifier," and I got the Ninny,
Yes.
N-I-N-N-I, because I heard that's great for breastfed babies.
Mhm.
She didn't know how to take it. I introduced, I think, for the first time at 8 weeks. She was 8 weeks old. And I tried many times. Neither of my kids could actually, Julian took it for, like, 2 seconds and then, like, spat it out, and I never tried again. So he's never taken one. She's officially never taken one. I was always scared of, like, what if I introduce the wrong one and then, like, I
Yeah.
mess up their teeth or their jaw or their speech? Like, or what if
Mhm.
she, like, gets so addicted to it and then there's a huge meltdown I have to deal with later? Like, every time you introduce a tool, you always have to
Yes.
worry, like, just like with a screen, even if it's low stimulating, when you turn the TV off, you know there's going to be a meltdown. So,
Mhm.
okay, let's talk about more nitty gritty with pacifiers. What are
Yes.
bad ones for breastfed babies and what
Yeah.
are good ones?
So, bad ones are going to be ones that are like a bulb. I
Hmm.
think bibs is one of the ones that are like a bulb, and they don't allow for the tongue to wrap around it, And so your tongue is basically just laying flat, and instead of doing a scooping motion, it's just kind of rubbing back and forth on the pacifier. That's not going to be great. It also, because it's round instead of flat, it puts pressure up into the palate. I don't love that. Also, the ones that are the green pacifier with the animal hanging off of it,
Oh, yeah.
we should never be using that
I see those
because it's
everywhere.
awful.
What happened? That was not around in the 90s when we were growing up,
No,
but they're everywhere.
everywhere. And the issue with it is not the pacifier. I'm okay with the Avent Soothie. It's the animal hanging off of it pulls on the jaw, and it
Uh,
causes literally buck teeth.
wait, get out because I have seen this phenomenon in so many kids when they take the one out with the animal,
Yep.
and I've seen it, and they're as young as like under 2 years old
Yep.
with buck teeth.
Yeah. It's because of that pacifier. It's not the pacifier itself, it's the animal hanging off.
This makes so much sense. The weight of the animal. And then how much does it cost? I mean, in America, at least, we don't have socialized healthcare to fix buck teeth. You're looking at probably thousands of
Thousands
dollars.
of dollars because of this $10 pacifier.
This is like the biggest scam. Okay, so like we
Yeah.
know we hate that pacifier.
Yes.
So is Ninny and Co. Is that one of your favorite
That
brands?
is probably my top recommendation. It is made out of like food grade silicone, I believe, and it's really squishy. A lot of babies who have low tone or tongue ties do
Yeah.
not know how to take it.
Yeah, that
My
explains.
tricks are to fold it in half and then give it to them and then
Oh,
let it pop open, or stick your finger inside of it, give it a little bit more firmness first, and then pull your
yeah.
finger out. I like to use the Ninny when I'm doing suck training for babies who are going to have a release. So
Wow. I didn't know about
that's,
the folding in half trick. That's cool.
yeah, that one's really awesome. But for babies who have tongue ties, they generally have a higher need to suck. And,
Yeah.
um, mom's nipples might be destroyed because of the tongue ties. So giving the Ninny pacifier, I think, is a really great way to just bridge that gap of needing to suck but not needing to eat.
One of the other concerns you just reminded me that I had with introducing a pacifier at all with my first, aside from the concerns I mentioned, was what if I'm accidentally missing opportunities to feed on demand,
Yes.
especially in those early weeks? Because I was so gung ho, like, we are going to get this exclusive on demand breastfeeding
Hmm.
relationship right, and nothing will get in my way. No bottle,
Yeah.
no pacifier, no bassinet. Like, my baby's going to live on me like I'm a hunter
Hmm.
gatherer, you know?
Hmm.
And I was like, "Okay," like, you hear about, like, some holistic moms are scared. They're gonna use the pacifier instead of going to the breast. Is this true? How do we combat this?
I don't think that it's necessarily true because we don't give our babies enough credit. At least as somebody who's taken care of literally hundreds of babies,
Mm,
if you give a baby a pacifier and they're sucking on it so hard and they're crying while they're sucking on it and they're spitting it out and you're putting it back in, they're hungry. Just feed
mhm,
them. But again, babies are so smart. They know the difference between a plastic pacifier and your breast that has milk coming out of it. So I wouldn't be as concerned. However, I also don't want people to be offering a pacifier if it's been longer than like an hour, hour and a half of feeding, and they're trying to just give me 20 more minutes. I just need to
mm,
not feed right now. So I always recommend feed first, pacifier after.
yeah.
So, or in an emergency like a car.
Okay, yeah, I would have had a lot more enjoyable car rides if my daughter had taken the pacifier, she did not. Um, yeah, I wanna talk about more pacifier stuff, this is so interesting.
Yeah.
So, even though you say you're pacifier neutral, we know it's a
Hmm.
tool just like a screen or what all these other tools we've talked about. At some point, we can all agree the pacifier needs to come out. And I've
Yeah.
seen some really old kids, and this is a judgment not on the child, maybe it's a judgment on the parents. I've seen some way too old kids who are potty trained, walking and talking
Oh, yeah.
in proper school, who are using pacifiers.
Yes.
This does bother me.
It bothers
Because
me
at
too.
that point, it needs to be parent-led, like the full-on weaning, and I know parents are afraid of, like, the reaction, the big reaction, but,
Hmm.
at some point, it's just weird to be a few years old with it, but I've seen in other countries, including in Europe, like and I've done some research, like, why this is more acceptable over there. They, I think, prioritize keeping the peace in general as a whole in society and not having big meltdowns. So if a child needs to regulate, they don't need to find those skills intrinsically. They can outsource to a tool like a pacifier, and it's not frowned upon. And they can do this at pretty old ages. So, okay, just tell me what you think. Like, when should, of course, it's subjective, but in your opinion, like, when is old? When is it too old to be using one?
So I have had these debates with dentists mainly because I'm not necessarily worried about like the societal judgment, but I'm more worried about like what's happening inside of their mouth.
Yeah.
And a lot of them agree that by the time they start developing teeth, that we need to be getting rid of the pacifier. So that could be 6 months, it could be a year, depending on the kid. I personally, I used it as a tool, and then by the time she was 5 months old, I was like, okay, we're done. I just cold turkey took it away. And
Wow. Most kids
it's
are we're talking like I've seen like up to 3 to 4 years sometimes.
Yes, that was my niece. My niece was the pacifier
Ugh.
kid. Now, what we have to realize is that it is going to change their oral function. So
Yeah.
she would talk through the side of her mouth with the pacifier right here. And she hasn't had a pacifier in 2 years, but she still talks like that with her
Get
mouth to
out.
one side.
Wait, I this is hilarious. Wait, I think Drew Barrymore does that a little bit too.
Yes,
Oh, wait,
yes.
I actually know a few people. Sometimes I get self-conscious. I'm like, am I doing that? Because I had the pacifier for so long. I don't want to be someone who's talking like all the way on one side of my
Yeah,
mouth.
yeah. I don't notice it in
Oh
you.
my. Okay, okay. So, that's good. That's good. So, yeah, and we know orofacially this isn't ideal, which can affect airway health and also ear
Yeah.
infections, right? Recurrent ear
Yes.
infections.
That's a huge thing is in breastfeeding, we tend to see that ear infections are lower, but in bottle-fed infants and in kids who use a lot of pacifiers, it's really high incidence and it's unfortunate.
When you took the pacifier away from your daughter at 5 months, did you cold turkey do it? Did you have these like
Mhm.
long conversations with
Oh no.
her? You're like, she's 5 months old.
We're 5 months old.
You didn't read books about
Oh
it and
no.
talk about it. You're just like, bye, and you toss that
Right,
in the
right.
garbage.
And
Was she freaking out?
no, no, she didn't miss
That's
it.
great.
She
That's
had no
great.
idea, and now she has no idea what a pacifier is. We were reading a book
That's
and a baby had a
amazing.
pacifier, and then she got a baby doll with a pacifier, and she asked me, "What is this?"
You know what?
So,
Okay, so I was just thinking, I just got for, I think it was for Christmas, like Lucy's first baby doll. Otherwise, she's just been playing with all of Julian's hand-me-down toy,
mhm,
blocks and boy things. So I was like, you're gonna get a baby doll, so cute. And of course, it's interesting how the culture works. All the baby dolls come with pacifiers and bottles.
yes.
You'll never see a baby doll who, I don't know how, but you'd have to show the mom too, who's a breastfed baby,
Yep.
exclusively breastfed, right?
Mhm.
What does it say about the culture that every baby doll always has to have the pacifier and bottle, sometimes in their mouth, and you can't even remove it?
I know. There's a little hole in her baby doll's mouth for the pacifier to go into,
Oh
and
my.
I mean, I think they're just expecting that every baby's gonna need a pacifier and every baby's gonna
Right.
need a bottle.
Yes, yes, exactly. It's very interesting. Okay, so wow. So basically kids should be weaned off the pacifier when their teeth come in. This could be as early as 4 months,
Yeah.
could be 6 months for some kids. Now, what is it about having teeth that's not good for using a pacifier?
So it puts pressure on the teeth and it
Oh, right,
can
right, right.
kind of just like shift where they are in the mouth.
That's right, that's right. Okay, so we're seeing a lot of orthodontic issues potentially because of that.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes.
which is great if you're an
It's
orthodontist and you live in
amazing.
these areas, which is awesome for your business, just not
Yes.
great if you're the mom of the child
Yeah.
with the issues. Okay, I know we're like a little bit up on time, but is there anything I didn't ask you about that you are dying to talk about before we wrap?
Mm,
Could be about any of these topics, anything.
I think the last thing that I wanted to bring up was milk storage guidelines.
Yes, please.
So that is controversial for some reason.
I know.
Um,
It's like raw
and
milk being controversial.
yes. And it's so frustrating to me because every source you go to, CDC, World Health Organization, AAP, they all have different recommendations.
Yeah.
And they also give a range for the room temperature. So they
Mm.
all say room temperature is between 64 and 78 degrees. Now, we know that bacteria grows after 75 degrees. So if your house is
Wow.
at 64 degrees, which I mean, mine's not usually that cold, but
Yeah, it's
if it's
freezing.
yeah, but if it's less than 75, it's going to take a lot longer than the recommended 4 to 6 hours at room temp to grow bacteria.
Right.
And then the other thing is that in refrigerated milk, they actually just kind of ran out of funding for research to go past the 7 to 8 days. It's not that your milk goes bad after 7 to 8 days, it's just they don't know. And so I did
Mm.
my own experiment with my own breast milk and I was like, well, I'm curious. So it was 15 days before my milk went bad.
And you're comfortable sharing that on the record with my listeners?
I'm okay with that.
Okay, good. I see, this is so cool. This is the critical thinking kind of content that I'm interested in getting out to the world.
Yeah,
When you go past the generalized recommendations, the routine recommendations, which by the way, are not even standardized from one three-letter organization to the next three-letter
right.
organization.
Right. Now, I do think that there is a purpose for the recommendations because not everybody knows what they keep their house at. Not
Yep,
everybody has the ability to just leave their breast milk out and keep tasting it.
true.
But my general recommendation is let's just taste it and smell it. And if it tastes and smells fine, then we're probably okay in a
Yep.
healthy full term infant.
Yes, the nose knows.
Yes.
That is when I'm testing out ferments, meats,
Mm-hmm.
the nose knows. Use
Yes.
your eyes, use your nose, then use your critical thinking brain,
Mm-hmm.
all of that together.
Yeah.
And it just reminds me of like, okay, seatbelts, not seatbelts, driver's licenses. So they have to set the age limit to
Right.
16 years old or 18 years old, whatever it is, because they're thinking about like what's the most conservative
Mm-hmm.
option.
Yes.
Some kids will be emotionally mature enough to handle driving a car at probably 12 years old, and other kids won't be ready to handle driving a car till they're like 25,
Right.
you know?
Exactly. And it's the same thing here of like test your own milk in your own
Yeah.
home settings. And if your baby's sick, like premature or ill, immunocompromised, we're not going to do this. We're going to follow the strictest conservative measures. But
Hmm.
just knowing like where these recommendations are coming from is important.
I wanted to ask you real quick. So in the NICU, sometimes you'll see nurses who will yell in the comment section in all caps, like "fed is best." Hmm. And And I'm just wondering, do you think it's especially important for NICU babies who are typically underweight, immunocompromised, born way too early? Do you think it's especially important for them to not just be fed formula, but to be fed breast milk? And why is that?
Absolutely. So, necrotizing enterocolitis is something that we're really concerned about in infants who are born premature. Their gut is just not as established as a full term infant. And if we are introducing formula, which we hope they're giving the ready to feed, which is supposedly sterile, but we don't actually know, that is introducing bacteria into their gut versus breast milk, which has immune factors and is actually specific to that premature infant, because there's a difference between premature milk and mature milk. So that is, it's an important factor.
Okay. And so moms have a very hard time, like it's like being in NICU jail, like when their babies are in the NICU.
Yeah.
Moms have a hard time, I'm sure, just even pumping and giving milk to their
Hmm.
babies. In some NICUs, I'm sure every hospital's so different, depends on the nurses you're assigned. But what about, yeah, like what are your tips for NICU moms to get that baby exclusive breast milk, even if it's donor milk, which I'm sure is even harder to get?
At least where I am, donor milk is just you ask the question and it's given. So
Wow.
that's great. I have had clients who have asked their sisters or their friends if they can bring in the breast milk. A lot of times the hospital will say no unless they know that it's the mom's milk, which is a little unfortunate. But pumping and making sure that you're doing a lot of skin to skin, taking care of yourself also is going to be important. So make sure you're actually eating and drinking and napping when you can, because stress can play a role. But those are ways that we can just try and get more breast milk into your baby. Also, ask for the donor milk.
Is it possible to exclusively breastfeed quadruplets? I've seen it done with triplets in Europe, but like it's a combination of bottle feeding with pumped mom's pump breast milk and then tandem feeding the other two. But what about with quadruplets?
That I I wish that I could say that I had experience with. I think the most that I have seen was triplets. Now, I have also worked with women who have crazy high supply with twins. Like they are
Mm,
making 80 ounces a day and they could easily have fed quadruplets.
wow.
But I think it's very dependent on the mom. However, the more you demand of your body, the more milk is going to be produced. And so I think that it's doable. You're just gonna
Yeah.
put a lot of demand on your body.
Okay. And oh, I had another question for you. Oh yeah, the trend of I don't know what else to call it aside from a trend. So but I am genuinely curious of colostrum harvesting. When did this begin? Why? When is it warranted in your
Yeah.
professional opinion? And like, why are moms turning to this?
Yeah, so I think that they're terrified that they're not gonna have enough milk when the baby's born and they're trying to avoid formula. My response is just don't give the formula. You will have
Yeah,
enough milk when your baby is born unless you have risk factors. So if you are severely diabetic with uncontrolled blood sugars, when your baby is born, there's a chance that their blood sugar is gonna drop and they just might not be up for nursing. So rather than give formula, you could just harvest some colostrum, bring it with you to the hospital, and give it to them in those circumstances. Other circumstances, I've had women who have insufficient glandular tissue, and they're like, I'm just going to try to harvest a little bit of colostrum prior to, just get a little bit of a head start. This is not going to increase your milk supply. This is really just
a
offering
bridge,
a little bit,
right?
yeah, yeah, just a
It's
bridge.
okay. So it's almost like an insurance policy, right? And like
Correct.
an emotional security blanket. Like this is going to bridge the gap.
Yeah.
God forbid.
Hmm.
Sorry.
Yeah. So,
God
yes,
forbid I don't have the supply.
yeah, yes. Other options would be like if you knew you were going to have a C-section and you wanted to make sure that your milk was going to be able to, you just didn't want to use formula, essentially. Or if you have like fertility issues and you knew that you had PCOS, which insulin resistance can have an effect on your milk supply, then yes, I would say let's do some colostrum harvesting. The recommendation is usually after 37 weeks. I've seen it as low as 35 weeks. It's not really necessary in a full term healthy pregnancy, though.
Wow. This has been so informative. So cool. You're just such a wealth of knowledge.
Thank you.
And it's so cool that you're my cousin.
I know this has been so much fun.
I know. This is great. Wow. I mean, we could talk about this for hours.
Yes, literally.
And we would love it. Okay, so do you have a public social media presence where you would like for listeners to follow you?
Um, I actually recently stopped on social media as much.
No worries.
But my website we
Yes.
can put into the show notes.
Okay.
So we'll do that. And I am happy to answer any lactation questions, any doula questions. So, yes,
Okay. What is your website?
my website is www.oclactationstation.com.
So cute. Love it. And all right, we will add that in the show notes. And also, don't forget if you're listening to also head to the show notes because there's that freebie of questions to ask a birth attendant or birth provider in the interview process, which I consulted Megan on with this document. So, and she gave it her seal of approval and added some new questions. So, check that out. And yeah, reach out to Megan on her website if you are expecting, especially if you're in the California area and you have any questions with finding a doula or getting lactation support. So thank you so much for this lovely Sunday afternoon conversation.
Yes, thank you so much for having me.
Of course. See ya.